Okay, you must not be on. Could that be any more moving? Thank you so much. To the Angelica Contini Choir for sharing the same song with us that you shared at the Super Bowl last year. Thank you so much. I'm Irene Kelly, the District Governor of Rotary District 5950. I'm thrilled to welcome you all here today to join our special event. It's a pleasure to come together in community with our honored veterans and Rotarians from Rotary clubs in Area 3 in the Southwest Metro. So Rotarians, let's see who can out-cheer each other as you hear your club's name. Bloomington Noon. Okay, my club, Eden Prairie AM. Yay! Eden Prairie Noon. Edina. Edina Morningside. Ridgefield. South Metro Minneapolis. And aside from our Rotarians and our honored veterans today, we have a couple of other honored guests. We have with us U.S. Senator Tina Smith, and I haven't seen U.S. Congressman Eric Paulson, but he's in the room. Let us know. Both of these legislators have been active in Veterans Affairs and supported active men and women in the military. So please give a warm welcome for U.S. Senator Tina Smith, who's going to offer a few opening remarks.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I am so happy to be here with all of you and honored to be a part of your Veterans Day celebration. Thank you to Irene and to the Angelica Contini Choir. You guys did an outstanding job. And I don't know if I see my colleague Eric Paulson here, Congressman Paulson, but I wanted to acknowledge him and thank him so much for his service to Minnesota and to the state. And thank you so much to the Southwest Metro Rotary for bringing us all together. You know, Irene and I were just talking about how Rotaries in every part of this state in this country provide the networking and the linkages that make our communities stronger. I think of Rotaries as really the civic infrastructure of our communities all across the state. So it is my great honor to be here with all of you today, and I'm so grateful to have a chance to talk with you a little bit. You know, I just want to note that this year marks the 100th anniversary of the Armistice of World War I, which ended on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. And it also marks the 153rd anniversary of the Civil War. And I always think about Minnesota's first volunteer regiment when it comes to the Civil War. You know, Minnesota was the newest state in the Union. And we had a population of only about 180,000, but we sent the Minnesota 1st to fight at the Battle of Gettysburg, and these young Americans and young Minnesotans who fought and lost their lives there are really symbolic of the sense of service and giving back to our country and our state that is so much a part of who we are in Minnesota. And it is fitting to me that we remember those and the many, many, many thousands of other Minnesotans who have served our country and our state so well. In fact, Minnesota, though we are relatively low state population-wise, have provided service to our country way out of proportion to our size. And this is something that I feel so proud of. Earlier this morning, I had a chance to go visit the Veterans Home just a couple of miles away in Minneapolis and see the commitment that we make to our veterans who serve this country and who should be able to expect and know that they will get the benefits and the care that they deserve in return. 300 Minnesotans are there getting fantastic care, and it warms my heart to think of this, what we're able to provide to them there, and then to be here with all of you. This is a very important day for us all to come together. I'm grateful to be able to be here with all of you. And as I think about the conflict that we see in our nation and in our country today, to see this room of people who come together in shared common cause, believing that if we work together across lines of difference, we can find ways of accomplishing things for our country and for our state, that to me is the meaning of public service, and it is what mobilizes and motivates me every single day. So thank you so much to all of you for asking me to join you today and help celebrate Veterans Day. Now, I would like to invite Brigadier General Denny Schulstad and Colonel Ken Rizer to join me so that I can present each of you with U.S. flags, which I had flown over the United States Capitol in your benefit and honor. Yeah. Let's see. Brigadier General Denny Schulstad.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Very welcome. And Colonel Rizer.
Thank you, Senator.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so
Thank you so much, Senator Smith. We're pleased to have you today, and pleased for your leadership and your participation. Thank you.
Have a good lunch, everyone.
So now we're delighted to have retired Brigadier General Denny Schulstad as our MC today. Dennis has had dual careers, one in the military and one in politics. He's a retired Air Force Brigadier General and also, for 22 years, an elected member of the Minneapolis City Council. He's been a consultant for numerous campaigns, ranging from U.S. Senate to governor to the legislature. He recently served as the national president of the 62,000-member University of Minnesota Alumni Association. Big number there. The Secretary of Defense appointed him to be Minnesota State Chair of Employer Support of the Guard and Reserve, a position he held for 7 years. He was selected to be a member of the Civic Leader Advisory Group to the Air Force Chief of Staff. Denny's a co-founder and board president of the Minnesotans Military Appreciation Fund, which has raised over $16 million to distribute to Minnesota members of the armed forces who have served in a combat area after 9/11. Please give a warm welcome for our illustrious MC, retired Brigadier General Denny Schulstad.
Well, thank you, Irene, and thank you to Senator Smith. As Senator Smith pointed out, it was 100 years ago, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, that World War I ended. That was the war, remember, that would end all wars. If only that had happened. But we're a peaceful nation. And in the 250 years that we've been in existence, we've been involved in about a dozen wars. Some of those for our very existence. Back in 1954, they changed the name of Armistice Day into Veterans Day. And now we celebrate all of those who have served and are currently serving our nation. Memorial Day in May celebrates those and honors those who gave their lives. Veterans Day is for all who served and are still serving. We owe every soldier, every sailor, every airman, every Marine, every Coast Guard member a great debt of gratitude that we can never, ever repay. Every one of them signed up to defend our nation, even if it would cost them their lives. This is the Rotary motto, service above self, which every single veteran has signed up for. This annual Southwest Rotary Luncheon is one of many to commemorate and to thank veterans, but I attend it each year And trust me, this is one of the very best anywhere in our nation to celebrate and thank our veterans for what they do. At this time, please stand for the presentation of colors by the Como Park High School Marine Corps Junior ROTC. Post the colors. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Angelica Contini Choir, under the direction of Beth Egger, will now sing the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
You may remember that choir from the Super Bowl last year. They made us all very, very proud. At this time, Chaplain Saul Groskopf from the Air National Guard 115th Fighter Wing in Madison, Wisconsin, will deliver the invocation.
Nearly 100 years ago, on November 10th, 1919, an organization was started in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the American Legion, a service organization for those who served, and part of our invocation today will be taken from that original invocation. I would ask that you pray with me. Almighty God, we thank you not only for the food and drink that will nourish us this day, but we thank you for the patriotic spirit which moves the men and women of Rotary to present themselves in a solid phalanx of service to others. On this day of remembrance of those who have, are, and will serve in the armed forces, we ask that you would grant to each and every one of us freedom with discipline, motivation with understanding, and determination with compassion. O Lord, show us your ways. Never deliver us into the hands of any enemy. Guide us in being generous towards one another. Keep us in the realization of the countless blessings that we have received from you and from those who have sacrificed their time, talents, and treasures, and even lives to support what we have today. Let us be grateful and accept the responsibilities which now fall upon each and every one of us. In your victorious name we pray. Amen.
I'd like to introduce and recognize several people. And please stand as your name is called, but please hold your applause until the end. The presidents of the Southwest Metro Rotary Clubs do so much to lead this Rotary organization. From the Bloomington Noon is Terry Lowe, Eden Prairie AM, Matt Crane. Eden Prairie Noon, Mark Byer. Edina, John Flynn. Edina Morning Sign, Dednick Kratney. From Richfield, Kirsten Nelson. And from the Southwest Metro Minneapolis Evenings, Kristen Schlau. These are your leaders. Please give them a big, big round of applause. And from Rotary District 5950, we have several dignitaries. And again, please hold your applause. You've already met Irene Kelly. She's the district governor from Eden Prairie AM. Tom Gump, the district governor nominee from the Edina Morningside Club. Carol McDonald, the executive director of District 5950. A big round of applause for the district leadership. We are honored to have some of our elected officials with us today. The program committee made the decision to introduce only current office holders without regard to the election that was just held. So again, please hold your applause. You've already met Senator Tina Smith, Minnesota House Member Jennifer Loon, Minnesota State Senator Melissa Franzen, Edina City Council Member and the Rotary Brass Quintet Mary Brindle, Bloomington City Council Member Tim Bussey, Eden Prairie City Council Member Brad Ahu, and not elected, but extremely important, the Chief of Staff for the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs, Mike McElhaney, and Mayor Jim Hovland from Edina couldn't be here today, but he sent a proclamation that we won't read, but it is commemorating the end of World War I and honoring all veterans. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for our elected officials. We have a valued tradition every year at this banquet. The Edina Rotary Veterans Luncheon, we have a brass quintet that is outstanding. And they play all of the service songs, and we would invite each of the veterans, each of the service members, when your song is played, please stand up so we can all recognize who was in each of the services. Ladies and gentlemen, the Rotary Brass Quintet. United States Army. The United States Marine Corps. United States Navy. United States Air Force. The United States Coast Guard. Thank you to the brass quintet. Now will all veterans please rise for a big round of applause. I know we have one World War II veteran with us. I'm going to introduce him. Are there any other World War II veterans? Back here, back here. Okay. Would our World War II veterans please rise? A great big round of applause. Now, why do we care about World War II veterans? All they did was save the world. The defining event of the entire 20th century was World War II. Lose that war, and we wouldn't be here today. And we could have lost that war. Thank you to our World War II veterans. But World War II was a very different time. 12% of our entire population was wearing a uniform and was off in combat. 12%. And the other 88% back home were building tanks, ships, airplanes, were rationing food, were rationing all the types of materials we needed to win that war. Our entire nation gathered together to win that war. Since then, by comparison, relatively few people served in Korea, served in Vietnam, served in Iraq, served on the War on Terror. The Korean veterans are largely forgotten. The Vietnam veterans were shamefully treated when they came back home because they were blamed for foreign policy they had nothing to do with making. And the veterans from the War on Terror, it's not 12% in uniform, it's less than 0.5%. It's not an entire nation working together, it's 1% of our nation. Well, the other 99% of our country is shopping at the mall. But every single veteran, whatever war you served in, or the Cold War for that matter, has made a tremendous sacrifice and was willing to give their life in defense of our nation. We can never thank them enough, and that is why we are here today. You're going to like hearing from our keynote speaker today. I met Colonel Ken Rizer 35 years ago. He was a high school junior sitting in my living room. He said, I want to be a fighter pilot. And I think I want to go to the Air Force Academy. And at that time, I was a liaison officer for the Air Force Academy. And the Air Force Academy is like West Point for the Army, Annapolis for the Navy. And I've worked with over 100 people similar to Ken. But he rose above and beyond. Ken did become a fighter pilot. He did graduate from the Air Force Academy. He did have 2,700 hours of flying time, much of that in combat. He had 25 years of experience in the Air Force in various command positions, combat positions. His final assignment was at Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. He had Air Force One, he had the Honor Guard, he had the band, he had Arlington Cemetery, he had 4,000 people reporting to him. I knew he was very important because when I would go out to Andrews and see him, at the Officers Club, they have reserved parking places. Normally, the closest one is maybe a general, if they have one. Otherwise, it'd be a colonel, somebody. There it was Colonel Rizer, right by the door. Next to him was the Secretary of Defense. Next to him was the Secretary of the Air Force. Next to him was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Next to him was a 4-star general. I got to park out in the back 40. So I knew he was a pretty important guy. Well, 5 years ago, he called me. And he asked me if I could come officiate a very important ceremony for him. I said, you bet, you're going to make general. I'll be there. He said, no, I'm going to retire. I said, whoa, they didn't give you this assignment to retire. They have stars in mind for you. And he said, well, let me explain. My wife is from Iowa. We have moved 17 times in 24 years. And she said, move number 18 is going to be back to Iowa. Would you care to join me? So he did. He moved back to Iowa. But he didn't just sit around. He was the senior vice president of Goodwill. He was an aviation professor. He was an elected member of the Iowa state legislature. He's done pretty well. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear a very good story from an American hero and from my good friend, Colonel Ken Rizer.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, General Schulstad, for that kind introduction. You know, he and I go back, like he said, it's been almost 40 years, and you know, he was a captain when I met him, and we have kept in very, very close touch ever since. And you have been a mentor to me throughout my entire Air Force career, and then even through my very short political career. So thank you for that, General. As General Schulstad said, I was the base commander at Andrews Air Force Base. And one of my responsibilities there was whenever President Obama flew in on Air Force One or Marine One, or whenever he came to Andrews to play golf, which was just about every nice Saturday, it was my responsibility to go greet the president. And so I have probably 100 one-minute conversations with President Obama, walking between Marine One and Air Force One, or walking from the limo to the first tee. And the president was always very kind to me and my airmen. He was a great gentleman. We avoided talking politics because he and I were on different sides, and we just didn't, you know, we kept it professional. But there was one time. We were walking from Marine One to Air Force One, and I had something on my mind that I had to tell the Commander-in-Chief. So I said, Mr. President, Brett Favre and my Minnesota Vikings are going to kick your Bears' asses on Monday Night Football. Well, of course, the president, being a die-hard Bears fan, responded, well, a picture paints 1,000 words. And unfortunately for me, Brett Favre, and our Minnesota Vikings, the president was right that year, but I think the Vikes are looking pretty darn good this year, so I'm optimistic. Thank you to Rotary for having me here today. I have been a Rotarian, and I hope to be again in the future, and I know the fantastic things that you do, and I know the key to being a Rotarian is service before self, which is something I feel very strongly about. You could be lots of places today, but instead you are here to honor those veterans who have served in the past and who are presently serving. And for that, I salute you. What I'd like to do today is share with you some stories from my career that kind of capture for me what Veterans Day is all about. My grandfather was an Army medic. He ran a MASH unit in World War II. And it was during the Battle of the Bulge, and that was the bloodiest battle of World War II for the United States, and we needed a lot more medical personnel over there. So Grandpa got on one of those old wooden gliders out of some base in England, and they flew across the channel, and they crash landed someplace in France, and he set up this MASH hospital. And there was an Army major who came in and was in really, really bad shape. And Grandpa managed to save this soldier's life. And after the soldier had recovered, it was time for him to go back to his unit. And he wanted to give my grandpa something. But he didn't have anything to give him because he'd come right from the field. So what he did is he took off his major's oak leaves and he gave those to my grandpa and said, "Thank you for what you did for me." Well, when I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force, my grandpa presented me with those gold oak leaves. And he said, "I want you to remember all those veterans who have gone before and have sacrificed so that our country might be free. And as you start your military career, I want you to never, ever forget that the torch is being passed to your generation." I still have those oak leaves to this day. We talked about the World War II vets in the room. We had more than 400,000 veterans who lost their lives in World War II. And as a result of their sacrifice, most of Europe and most of Asia ended up being free and remain so to this day. For my first operational assignment, I was a reconnaissance F-4 pilot in Korea. And on the weekends, I used to like to take my mountain bike out and explore the countryside. And there was one day I was going to ride up this mountain trail, which was right outside of Daegu Air Base. And it started off as, actually it was a paved road, and then it got narrow, and then it turned into a dirt road, and then it was kind of like a little cow path, and eventually it was just a single file walking path. And as I went up this path, I came upon a clearing, and there was a little farm partway up this mountain, and there was actually a little rice paddy there. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I kind of pulled into this area, and there was this little old woman who looked much like this woman here, who started approaching me. And her skin was leathered and tan. She was very wrinkled. She was stooped over and probably was all of about 4'2". And she came right up to me. And any of you who've served in Korea or been with Koreans, you know their concept of space is a little different, personal space. So she was right in my face, looking up at me. And she put her hands out like she wanted something. I realized she wanted to hold my hands. So I put my hands out, and she grabbed them, and she looked into my eyes, and she said, "America, America." She kind of bowed, and then she walked away and kind of bowed as she backed away. And I bowed, and I said, "Kamsahamnida," which is thank you. And then I got back on my bike and I rode back down the mountain. And I started thinking, what was that all about? And I realized that for this woman, she had lived through the Korean War. And this was a war where more than 1 million Koreans died. Just imagine that. And our forces were almost pushed all the way into the sea off the peninsula. But because of MacArthur and the UN forces and mainly United States forces, we were able to push back and eventually held the line and made South Korea free. Well, as a result of that, South Korea is now, depending on what numbers you look at, the 10th or 12th biggest economy in the world. If you have visited Korea, it is an incredibly modern society. Beautiful buildings, beautiful airports, sophisticated people. And I think what this woman was doing when she looked at me is I think she was remembering how her country was in peril and American service members came to their aid. And as a result, her children and grandchildren were able to live a life with a standard of living and with freedom that she never could have imagined. So I think she was thanking all of America through me, who was the American standing right in front of her. I served in Desert Storm, flew reconnaissance F-4s out of Turkey and in northern Iraq, and after the war came back to my base in Texas, and Texas decided they were going to do a massive parade for all the units that were stationed in Texas, and Texas doesn't do anything small. And in this parade, I remember looking out at all of the soldiers and Marines who were marching in lockstep and looked very, very professional. Well, for we aviators, we were on the back of a flatbed, and we had put hay bales, and we were sitting or standing and waving to the crowd. So we were interacting with the crowd. And as I'm waving and interacting with the crowd, I notice a gentleman that looks a lot like this. And he's kind of in the back of the crowd, and he's got a boonie hat on, he's got medals on it, he's a little scraggly looking, and it was clear to me that he had served in Vietnam. As he caught my eye, he snapped to attention, and then he whipped off an incredibly sharp salute. Well, I immediately snapped to attention, and I returned his salute, and as I returned it, he dropped his very, very slowly, and then he turned around and he walked away. And I was thinking, well, what just happened there? And as I thought about it, I thought, when he came back from his war, there were no parades. In fact, he and his colleagues were spat upon and were called baby killers and were treated just horribly. And I think in his being there, in a way, he was honoring those of us who were coming back from a war in the way that we should be honored. But in the same way, I think the respect that the people were giving all of us, I think was reflecting back on his generation as well. So I think he was saying thank you. There were 58,000 Americans who gave their lives in the Vietnam conflict. This is Captain Ben Slinger Zettel. Ben was top of his class, the Air Force Academy, went to pilot training, top of his class, got his first choice, which was F-16s, and he ended up in my squadron in Clovis, New Mexico. He was married to a beautiful and smart and vivacious young lady named Molly, and he was our very best wingman and was slated for an early upgrade to be a flight lead. There was nothing that this guy couldn't do. He was on my wing on September 9th, 2002. And it was a very dark night, and I was leading a 3-ship of F-16s. We were fighting against a 4-ship of F-16s, And we were the bad guys and they were the good guys, and we were going at each other in this air-to-air combat. It was very dynamic, and we're doing lots of maneuvering. And the first engagement was uneventful, and when we set up for the second engagement, and the second engagement, Slinger started his maneuver, and of course it's so dark we can't see each other. And as he started his maneuver, turns out he became spatially disoriented. And he went into what's known in the flying world as a classic death spiral, where you're in a steep descending turn, but your body feels like you're straight and level. And he recognized it, and he rolled back to level as he should, but when you're in this steep spiral and you roll to level, your body lies to you, and it tells you you actually are rolling the other way. So he rolled back into the turn. And he was going about 600 knots in this steep turn when he finally realized what he needed to do, and he rolled level, he pulled the power to idle, and he pulled for all he was worth on the stick. He pulled at 8.5 Gs. And if he'd had 200 more feet, he would have made it. So he impacted in the desert, and it looked like a nuclear bomb going off. I tell you that story because we actually lose more military members in non-combat accidents, suicides, and non-combat related things than we ever do in combat. And Slinger knew when he went out on that mission that there was risk involved. But if we're going to have the best military in the world, we have to take some risk in training so that we can be as good as we need to be when we're fighting for real. And then finally we end up at Arlington. When I was the base commander at Andrews Air Force Base, I was responsible for all of the Air Force funerals at Arlington. And we did about 1,000 funerals a year, if you can imagine. And the thing about doing funerals at Arlington, well, first off, the people that are in the honor guard, and that's who you see here, that's the Air Force Honor Guard, the airmen in the Air Force band and the chaplains are the very, very best. The honor guardsmen all look like they're middle linebackers for the Vikings because they have to carry that casket. And they perform every single funeral with absolute excellence and perfection. And they have to, rain or shine. Because for that airman who they are laying to rest and the family of that airman, it doesn't matter that they're doing 6 more funerals that day. There's only one funeral that matters, and that's that airman's funeral. There are no do-overs at Arlington. You have to be perfect all the time. So I used to go out and visit my airmen out there, and I tended to go out there when the weather was really, really bad. And so I went out one day, and it was freezing cold, sleeting rain. The rain was kind of going sideways. It was absolutely miserable. And I went up to Master Sergeant Smith, who was going to lead the next funeral detail. And I went up to him, and I said, "Hey, Master Sergeant Smith, how you doing this cold, miserable day?" He said, "Sir, it is a great Air Force day, and I have never been better." And I was like, "What's that all about?" I said, "Master Sergeant Smith, why do you say that? I mean, it's absolutely miserable out here today." And he said, "Colonel, when it is a beautiful day at Arlington, families come out, friends come out, there are flags, there are the stones, it's absolutely beautiful." And he said, that's all well and good. But when it's really miserable out here, the only people that come out are the immediate family members and us. And he said, that is when I really feel like what I'm doing matters the most. And as he said that, it really made me ashamed. You know, here the colonel is thinking, "Oh, what a miserable day." And I had a little bit of an attitude adjustment, which any of you who've been in the service, you know, it's usually the NCOs and senior NCOs who are giving the attitude adjustments to the officers anyway. But I realized he was right. He was there to honor those airmen, and he was proud to be doing that. And that's exactly what you're doing today. You are just like Master Sergeant Smith. You are here today because you are honoring all those veterans who have gone before and those who are manning the ramparts today, to thank them and honor them. Because you know that freedom isn't free. And from the dawn of our history, from Lexington and Concord on, there have been more than 1.2 million Americans who have given their last full measure of devotion that we might be free. They knew that the cost could be high, and you know that the cost can be high. And because of those sacrifices that have been made in the past and are being made right now across this world, the United States is the freest, greatest country in the world. And we owe a huge debt of gratitude to all those veterans who have served before and have served today. So on behalf of those veterans, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming here today and for honoring our veterans, and may God bless America. Thank you.
Did I tell you you would enjoy hearing Colonel Ken Rizer? Like most high-ranking Air Force officers, he has not only a master's degree, he has 3 master's degrees. One from Harvard, from Stockholm University, and one from the University of Iowa. Yes, he's a Hawkeye. To thank you and to show appreciation, the Rotary will be sending a donation in your honor to the Minnesotans Military Appreciation Fund. All of you should know about that fund. It's one that has raised $17 million, and we give a letter of appreciation and a check for anywhere from $500 up to $10,000 for serving in a combat area after 9/11. The person who started that, Gene Sitt, said, "I do not want our veterans today to be treated the same way that veterans coming home from Vietnam were treated." And that's the reason that Minnesota is the only state in the United States of America doing this. And Ken was the speaker for their banquet last year. And previous to him, we've had Tom Brokaw, Tom Friedman, Senator John McCain, and yours, people said, was the best speech of them all. So thank you very much. Rotary is 1.2 million community leaders in 165 nations around the world. And they band together to try to make the world a better place and to make our communities a better place, and indeed they do that. And it's a banquet like this where you're supporting veterans that means so very, very much, and that's why I'm so honored to be here. A program like this requires quite a bit of preparation, quite a bit of planning. And we'd like to thank those people who are most responsible, of course, Colonel Ken Rizer, the Como Park High School Junior ROTC, the Rotary Brass Quintet, the Angelica Cantani Choir. But the hard work of organizing it was done by the presidents-elect of Rotary for next year. There are 7 metropolitan Southwest Rotary organizations, and it's their presidents-elect who did the hard work, and by Stephen Barreto, who chaired the whole program. And so would all of you presidents-elect and Stephen please rise for a big round of applause. And we have a special announcement right now from Dennis Hikes.
Yes, this will be brief. Let me say this, Denny, as a fellow veteran, I want to thank you for serving as our Master of Ceremonies today, and as a fellow Rotarian, I want to thank you. It's not a trivial job, as those of you in the room know who've done this before, keeping track of the moving parts. And Denny, this is not the first time we thanked you for this. You've done this before for us, and every time we ask, you always say yes. So I simply want to say that to recognize our appreciation for what you've done for us, and in years past, we're pleased to be making a donation to the Minnesota Military Appreciation Fund in your name. Thank you.
I didn't know what he was going to say. I'd like to give him much more time. Thank you for attending. This is a very, very meaningful luncheon every year. And you are showing appreciation to all of those men and women who are defending our nation, and we can only offer them our sincere appreciation. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise. Retire the colors.
Color, Hudson, cut, carry, cut. Ready, cut. Forward, march. Color, halt. Post. March. Color, halt. Order. Cut.
Ladies and gentlemen, when you wonder about the youth of today, all you have to do is go visit the Air Force Academy or look at these young men and women at the Como Park Junior ROTC program. Thank you for being here today.